The House just passed the Build Back Better bill and has sent it over to the Senate. But what does that actually mean for your wallet? There's lots to unpack here in the over 2,000 page bill. But in this episode of the Neighborhood Money Podcast, we are really only going to focus on those specific pieces of the bill that are going to impact you and impact your wallet. Welcome to the neighborhood. Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to help you grow your financial knowledge and build a life you deserve. Drew, what is going on, man?
Not a whole lot, just another day of a podcasting, I suppose.
It is actually, we record this podcast a week in advance, and tomorrow is Thanksgiving. I know we talked about it last week in the podcast around being thankful, but I know me personally, I'm gearing up to eat some turkey.
Turkey Day's upon us, and some turkey sandwiches for leftovers after tomorrow. I'm pretty excited for, and a little bit of mashed potatoes. And if people who know me always make fun, and I make fun of myself saying I have a little bit of a baby tummy, so I don't end up eating a whole lot. My eyes are always way bigger than my stomach, and my plate's normally full, and I just pick at it throughout the day.
I'm like the opposite, man. I eat so much, right? Like I'm so uncomfortable afterwards. And then I add on the pie on top of that because that's probably my favorite piece of the meal, if I'm going to be really honest.
Pumpkin pie, or because I know you're a big spice latte guy.
I am a big pumpkin pie fan. So Drew, question for you. Do you like pie first? I guess is the first question.
I do like pie. I think I actually prefer it over cake.
So when you eat your pie, are you a person that puts a little bit of Cool Whip or whipped cream on it, or do you douse the thing like
I
a
put
blanket?
none.
No.
And I'm kind of picky on my pies. I like the fruit-based ones. So like blueberry is my favorite, and I just stick with the crust and the blueberry filling, and that's it.
Well, everyone, this is going to be the end of the Neighborhood Money Podcast because I don't know if I can hang out with someone that doesn't like Cool Whip or whipped cream on their pie.
Easy.
All right, Drew, let's get into the episode. Today's all about the Build Back Better bill coming out of the House that was just passed last week. There's a ton to unpack there, and neither of us are experts when it comes to the political landscape, but we are very interested in finance. And so we're going to bring not everything that's a part of the bill, but a lot of those main pieces of the bill that's really going to impact you or impact the broader community from a financial standpoint.
Definitely hitting the nail on the head there. There's lots and lots and lots to unpack in this bill. And I know with anything with bills, political wise, there can always be so much division. And we are finance guys that objectively want to look at something potentially that you can prepare for and how it may or may not affect your wallets.
Yeah, and if you guys want to let us know what you think about the bill, hit us up over on Instagram or Facebook. If you're watching over on YouTube, drop a comment below and just let us know what you think about it.
And like we said, it's over 2,000 pages, so there's going to be a lot that we miss. So what we do miss, please let us know what we miss and add it in the comments.
Absolutely. But first, Drew, let's get some trivia going.
The weekly trivia. So our first trivia question for the week is, how many miles would 1 trillion $1 bills stacked end to end measure in miles? So that's going to be a very interesting one and very good way to quantify what 1 trillion actually is.
The bill itself is estimated at 1.75 trillion, if not more than that. So hopefully gives you a little context into what the heck does that amount of money actually look like?
The second trivia is the Beatles were a worldwide phenomenon from 1960 to the 1970s, with the most number one hits of all time coming in at 20 songs. Which song was released on this date in 1963 that knocked their other hit, She Loves You, off the number 1 slot in the UK chart?
Give you a round of applause there, Drew, for reading that long, long trivia question.
Long trivia. So long story short, what song came out on this day to hit number 1 in 1963?
Drew, are you a big Beatles fan?
I like the Beatles. I like a lot of music. I'm really strange on just whatever you put on, I'll listen to, and I'll go in low waves for that. I'm never great with artist names or song names, but when it comes on, I go, I know that song.
You're a man of many genres.
I like to think so.
All right, so let's start to unpack this Build Back Better bill. There's a lot out there, and it actually, the total cost of this bill is estimated to come in at 1.75 trillion with a T dollars.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of stuff on the TV and media. This is actually not the infrastructure bill. This is a separate bill from that infrastructure bill that you heard was passed through the House, Senate, and signed by the president. So this is completely separate. This is another, like Cam said, 1.75 trillion. And there's also an appraisal out there by the Congressional Budget Office that it's actually upwards of $2.2 trillion.
We'll get into it even a little more than that, but there's some estimates that say that it could even be doubled or up to 4 to 5 trillion when you look at the 10-year time horizon. But this bill is really, at least the stuff we're going to talk about today, is really categorized into three main buckets, that being for children and childcare, healthcare, and education. So let's kind of think about it in that way. There's, other things outside of what we're talking about here today. For example, climate change actions and immigration. We're not going to touch on that. We really want to focus as objectively as we can here around the actual stuff in this bill that's going to impact your wallet. So if we start with that first one, Drew, the child care or for your children, there's a lot here.
So one of the first items that if you were to go to the .gov site that they talk about in the child area would be the free universal preschooling.
So this will give kids to about the age to 3 to 4. It'll provide funds for those families to really limit the cost of childcare and preschool. So it could be a really big benefit to you if you have a child of that age.
This could help in the areas of, instead of going to daycares or going, maybe even it helps on costs of foods for your kid. So there's a lot of ways that the universal preschooling would help people's pocketbooks on like a year to year basis.
I think one of the things to point out, Drew, is that this, Build Back Better bill is a 10-year bill. And, a lot of these things that we're going to talk about aren't going to last the entirety of that time. And this is one of them. This universal pre-K is actually going to expire after 6 years. So that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about some of these things is while it could be a really good benefit for families, to help pay for those childcare costs, it will expire, at least in the current state of the bill, after 6 years.
And then a second thing that is part of this bill is they have 4 weeks paid family and medical leave. So this is one of the first times that our nation is potentially going to be offering paid medical leave. So it's pretty, you could say, monumental side of it for the nation. On the other side, it's, how can it get paid for? But as we said, we're just going to see how it potentially would affect you.
Yeah, and this one is one of those more polarizing topics, but it does bring us up with some of the other developed countries around the world. But I think what's interesting about this one, it's not only just for if you're taking care of a loved one, but it's also if you're a parent and having a child. And so it kind of covers a wide range
Yeah.
of, different things that could qualify to get these 4 weeks of paid family leave or medical leave.
And going on to one of the another parts that are going to be potentially helping your pocketbook, it's an expansion or extending of the child tax credit that you've seen in 2020. And some of these limits have actually increased for the 2021.
So, if you're not familiar with what's happened here with the child tax credit, in the past, before the pandemic, the child tax credit was a $2,000 per child tax credit to you that you would get during tax filing season. However, during the pandemic, they actually increased that child tax credit to either $3,000 if you have a child between the ages of 6 and 18, or $3,600, $3,600 if your child's under 6. And the main reason of that is to help out families that have dependents through this time of the pandemic.
And I would say one other item with this child tax credit is in 2020, it was tax credit that would just reduce your tax liability. So when you're filing your taxes and say you made X amount of dollars, you'd minus that tax credit of that $2,000. And the way that they've advanced this child tax credit is they're going to be sending out monthly paycheck or not paychecks, but monthly checks to these families instead of it coming off of their tax bill at the end of the year.
That's a really good point. So they'll provide half of the benefit through those monthly payments. So I believe it's $300 per month if you have a child under the age of 6, and then 200 to 250. I don't remember how the math works out if you have a minor under the age of 18 but older than 6. And then you'll get the second half of that advanced child tax credit during tax filing season.
And these payments will start in July 15th, I believe it is.
Yep. So they already started for this year and then they'll continue into next year. And this is another one of those benefits through this bill that is going to be limited, whereas it's only going to be offered or expanded until 1 year. So it'll be the remainder of this year and then through 2022, and then it'll actually cease to exist and it will return back to the annual $2,000 child tax credit.
And as most things in these bills, they can be modified or they can be extended when a new season or no new year comes along. So it's something you want to plan for that's only extended for a year, but it's something to keep an eye on if it does get extended further into the future.
In addition to that, Drew, the only thing I wanted to add is that this is only passed through the House. So a lot of this stuff is subject to change.
Yeah.
Some of these things probably won't. There's will be some things that might change, but just keep that in mind too. That this bill is not final, but we did
Yeah.
want to at least provide you some insight into what's going on. But Drew, at face value, and thinking about if you have children, this looks pretty good to me. You've got some help with the child expanded child tax credit. You get some additional help on the childcare costs. And then you also get some help on if you're having a new baby or even helping out a sick one. So, at face value, cost aside, this could be a real big benefit to our neighbor.
Something definitely to keep in mind and to be adding into your next year's budgets, to be turning into your next year's tax planning and making sure you're talking with your tax professional and seeing how it does affect you as a family or single person.
Specifically if you're on those income limits, because a lot of this stuff has income limits on
Yeah.
it. There's some things that you can do right now to ensure that you get the benefit this year and next year, specifically looking at those advanced child tax credits. So make sure that if you are working with a financial advisor or CPA or something like that, make sure that you work with them now and that you set yourself up so that you do get this full benefit if you are, if you're able to.
Yeah, and if you're maybe even on that borderline of being able to get the benefit or not, that's the best time to where you can start planning as soon as possible. So then you can get yourself, if you're teetering that line, then with the correct tax professional or financial advisor, you may be able to make sure that you get just underneath that line to be able to get full benefits.
I guess just a quick example on that, going back to the child tax credit, I forget exactly what the threshold is, so don't quote me on this one, but let's just say it's $150,000 for a married couple filing jointly to get the full benefit. Well, let's just say a family makes 155,000, so $5,000 over that max. If you look at it right now, you could actually take $5,000, put that into a 401k, a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, and that would drop your taxable income and you're going to actually qualify for the full benefit. So not only are you increasing your money that you're putting away for retirement, you're also then going to get more of this benefit to you.
Great point. Great point. And I think that will lead us into the second section that we've broken this bill out into, and that would be the health insurance side.
So there's a lot here, but the crux of it is it's going to hopefully help
Mhm.
those individuals that have to buy healthcare out in the individual marketplace by reducing premiums through expanding premium tax credits for healthcare.
Yeah, they say that this is going to be affecting or helping nearly 9 million Americans. And they're pretty much talking on the lines of expanding and extending the Affordable Care Act. And they also are expanding the premium tax credits, which will kind of help make that health insurance more affordable, whether at the end of the tax year or on your month to month or paycheck to paycheck premiums.
The general idea here is to just hopefully we'll see how it actually plays out. Nothing ever actually plays out the way that it's supposed to, but hopefully it'll make healthcare more affordable. It will decrease the uninsured population and just give access to healthcare for more Americans.
We'll see it in theory. That's always always how it goes, but we'll have to wait and see exactly how that works out.
There's some other things too here, Drew. One of the big things, I was talking to my mom actually today, this morning, about what we were talking about this week for the podcast. And one of the things I brought up when we started talking about the Build Back Better plan was that the fact that hearing aids now are going to be covered under Medicare.
So when you're thinking of health insurance, as younger persons myself or whoever you're listening to, you never kind of think you're getting into the years of Medicare. And it's kind of strange that you wouldn't have potentially hearing coverage underneath that Medicare. But
Right.
one of the sides that didn't pass or that didn't make the bill was vision and dental. So you do get the hearing aid benefit, but the dental vision are still out as far as Medicare goes.
But I know those hearing aids, and they're expensive. I think my mom was saying like it was like 5 grand, and I don't know what the ongoing cost of that is. I know you have to get them maintenance from time to time. Yeah, and so it can be very expensive. I think another benefit here of from the healthcare side is that they actually are going to cap the out-of-pocket costs that Americans will have to pay for their or for their healthcare.
I think one of them we were talking about beforehand was like insulin, and
Yeah,
insulin is, I think it, how I don't know how many people it affects, but everybody, it seems like everybody knows somebody that's on insulin. And the
right.
fact that you could just charge these high dollar amounts for somebody to be able to live, it seems pretty crazy. And having a cap on it, I'm sure is definitely going to help people's pocketbooks at the end of the year, where it gives yourself maybe an extra couple $100 or an extra $100, per month or whatever it may be. So if there's any listeners out there that actually do use insulin, let us know, because I'm really, I'd really like to know from somebody that's actually going through it and see what it maybe costs you per month, or how often you're actually having to use it.
And then the last one that really falls under the healthcare is that they are expanding the amount of support for home care or community care based care. So this will allow more people to stay at home and get the care that they need rather than going to a nursing home for for that same care.
Yeah, so all in all, it does seem like the health insurance is not just helping younger individuals or employed individuals. It helps anybody from being very young to middle of your life towards the latter part of your age. So there's a lot to take in there, and that's another thing of just talking to or planning out exactly how you're going to end up using these potential benefits. And that brings us now into the third section of this Build Back Better bill that we've divided it out into, and that'd be the education section of it. So some of the big parts of the educational side is they initially were talking about maybe having the free college in there. That didn't make the bill, but what they did add in there is increased grants for post high school students.
Trying to decrease the ever growing and enormous costs of going to college, whether that's a 2 year associate trade or a 4 year, etc. Really trying to help out kids and students so that they don't have to take out as much debt, which in my opinion is one of the biggest crises in the United States right now, outside of the pandemic that we're living through. But looking at the 1.67 trillion dollar student loan debt, that bubble that we have,
Yeah.
hopefully this will help out a little bit.
Yeah, and in the short term and in theory, and it's probably a conversation for another day, but the fact is, the government coming in and trying to help so much with the education system, if it's actually helped lower costs or raise costs, is, like I said, probably a
Yeah.
conversation for another day. But as far as this bill right now, the free college is out, and the increased grants, and hopefully lowering your debt at the end of your 4, 6, or however many years it ends up being. Hopefully, it will decrease that dollar amount so that you can get financially free sooner.
There is one more thing here in the education piece that we wanted to talk about, and that's there's actually going to be some increased funding for things like building schools or maintaining schools, as well as increase to the amount of training that teachers are going to get.
Yeah, building that infrastructure for the educational system is, hopefully it's going to end up showing a, better environment for people to, learn, and hopefully there can be better training. So when you leave the educational system, you can end up being better off. This is, once again, it's probably been so many years, and these upgrades and these educational facilities, maybe it's something that they may have needed.
So that's a lot to unpack, Drew. We talked about, support for families and children. We talked about support for healthcare. And then we also talked about the educational pieces of this bill. But I think, what's most interesting to probably us and potentially the person listening here is like, all right, $1.75 trillion on top of an already, what did you say, $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. How is, this specific Build Back Better plan going to be paid for?
That's kind of the big question. They initially, if you were to go to the .gov site, they say that it's not going to cost a dime more, and it's already paid for. They don't really tell you how. The Congressional Budget Office tried to put together a big forecast for this plan, and I think that was released on November 18th of 21. And they actually their appraisal by it was showing actually upwards of $2.2 trillion, or $2.3 trillion, sorry, of the actual cost of it.
The White House is just coming out and saying, we've got it all covered. The different estimates that the CBO is using is different than what the White House is looking at. But at the end of the day, it's the White House is coming out and saying it's not going to cost, or it's going to be paid for with some of the tax changes they're making, while the CBO is saying, whoa, 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 no, there's actually going to be a over $350 billion increase to the deficit over the next 10 years.
And the reason I think they end up kind of saying too that it's not going to be adding is, for one, they say it's over this long period of time, and they say part of this bill is increased IRS enforcement. And so they forecast out how much more tax revenue they're going to be getting through this investment they might use into the IRS enforcement. So that's part of where they say, because I think they thought they can maybe get an extra like 250, $280 billion in tax revenue. But there are critics out there that say that these extensions to these plans, or they say they're done in 1 year, 5 years, 8 years, that they believe that these temporaries may become permanent, and so they'll be here long after this bill said that they were going to be. So that was like one of the big critiques of this too.
I think that's something really to talk about here, Drew, is we've mentioned how a couple of these provisions in the bill are going to only last a year, 2 years, 6 years, etc. But if they get pushed out, that already considerably increases the amount that this bill actually costs. And so if these provisions like the advanced child tax credit or the 4 weeks of paid family leave, if those get extended all the way out to the 10-year forecast, that could almost double the amount of money that this bill's actually going to cost. And that isn't actually accounted for when you think about how it's going to be paid. The government is coming out and saying that it's going to be paid through taxes on the wealthy, taxes on corporations. There's not going to be any tax increases to the middle class. And right now, I haven't seen anything in the reading that I've done that states that there will be an increase to the middle class or anything like that. But that's in the current state of the bill right now. We don't have any idea of what it's going to look like if some of these provisions get pushed out and all of a sudden we're not 300 billion in a deficit, now we're 2 trillion. That's got to be paid for somewhere.
And I think that would go back to inflation episode as the silent killer. So these studies that are being done, like I said, there's critics out there that say that their studies that they've been putting out for this bill are flawed. But it may be something even in the area of where they potentially get their numbers from, and kind of the unknown of inflation. So even though you're saving money maybe through tax credits or grants or health insurance, whatever it may be, there may be also a tax on the lower or middle class that you don't see, which would be inflation. So the cost of all your goods and your day-to-day stuff may be increasing without you even realizing it, because of how much more money and that they'll be circulating in the supply.
I think that's my biggest concern with all of this is the fact that we're in a recovery stage in our economy and now we're adding, an additional surplus or an
Hmm.
influx of money into the economy through these different tax credits. And with inflation already at a 30-year high, what does that look like? And like you said, you're absolutely right. Whether, you might not get increased taxed as, being a middle class or lower class individual from the government standpoint, but
Yep.
you potentially might feel the tax on the inflation side. And so you could at the end of the day be out more money than you actually are expecting
Yeah.
based on some of these provisions.
So I think that's like one of the big points too, is that we've said here is these are potential pocketbook helpers or herders, and we just want to make sure that the information gets out there so that you can plan accordingly. So if there is an increased inflation rate, that you're able to take advantage of potential tax credits to offset or even help you.
So one thing I did find is where some of this is going to be paid from. And so, specifically here, they're saying that there's going to be a new 15% tax on large corporations, a 1% surcharge on companies that actually perform a stock buyback, which at a high level is just saying a company buys their stocks back, which then helps out their shareholders that own the stock. Two other things where they're saying that this is going to be paid for is a surcharge on our wealthiest Americans. So there's a 5% tax rate on incomes above $10 million. with an additional 3% surtax on income that's above $25 million. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's the information that we could find. But like we've been talking, a lot of this can change and can be subject to change. And there's even things that aren't even in the bill that could impact you, like inflation.
Something to keep in mind with inflation is the more you end up taxing potential corporations, the corporation isn't like a person, it's an entity. So if that
Right.
entity wants to continue their margins, like we talked in our inflationary episode, there's a chance that you may have the increased cost of goods. Maybe that increases more to your wage, but that means everything else costs more. So there's always that balancing factor and something to keep in mind. Because I know there's always talking points out there that it's, well, tax corporations, not the people, but it kind of tends on trickling down.
I would agree with you on that one too. But at the end of the day, a huge spending bill.
Yeah.
There's a lot unknown around how it's actually going to be paid and how it's actually going to impact you guys,
Hmm.
us, and all of America. But we wanted to
Yep.
just at least throw the facts out there and try at least not to have any bias when we're talking about this information. But Drew, what do you think about all of this? What are some of, some of your main takeaways as we've been diving into the Build Back Better bill?
Yeah, I think probably I don't know, one of my key takeaways would just be how enormous this bill is, not only on the monetary side, but as far as how many pages of that are in this bill. So there's a lot to unpack. I think the big takeaways are you just want to see the parts that will affect maybe your family the most out of this and try being as proactive as possible. All these things in politics are subject to change. So it's just good to keep up on what's going on in the current events with these certain bills and just being ahead of the game instead of always, being retroactive on it.
I think taking a lot of the specifically if you're going to receive some sort of tax credit or anything like that, make sure that you're using that money appropriately for your individual situation. So whether that's putting a little bit more money aside for an emergency fund, putting a little bit more money towards investing for your retirement, or if you need it to actually fund your actual living expenses, make sure that you're just aware of that, but then also make sure that you're aware of the fact that inflation is high and there's a lot of uncertainty around that. So while you might be getting money back at the end of the year and into next year, some of that might get eaten up, or all of that might get eaten up through higher costs. So, just try to keep that in mind. Don't look at it as a bonus at the end of the year, because you might actually need it throughout the rest of next year and going into the future.
So kind of a plan for the worst and hope for the best type of deal.
Yeah, I guess that's one way to look at it. I wouldn't say maybe not the worst case scenario, but I would say, don't go out and buy a brand new car if you've got all of a sudden a $7,000 tax credit.
Yeah, just for the 1 year or 2 years.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it looks like there's a lot of good stuff in here that's going to hopefully help out families and individuals throughout the country. The concerning side is, how is it going to get paid and how is it going to have the ripple effect on the economy?
Probably throughout the episode, if you're watching the video one, you may even see some of or at least my eyes wander a little bit. And it's just because there's so many little parts in it. And I just want to make sure that we actually get them out to you guys as a listener.
So if you made it this far in the podcast, thank you so much for listening. And if you want to support the Neighborhood Money podcast and share what we do each and every week here in the neighborhood studio, the only thing that we ask you to do is to share this episode or any episode that we have with one other individual. That helps us grow this platform, and hopefully we're providing value to you, and then in turn can provide value to more and more people. We also are out on YouTube, so if you're watching over there, please consider subscribing to this channel, as that helps us grow that platform, and liking the video and letting us know in the comments if there's anything that you want to see from a future podcast episode. We'd be happy to do whatever you guys are interested in.
Absolutely. So that will bring us now into the trivia. So this is where it's going to be I think it should be pretty interesting. We're talking about these bills and these trillions of dollars. And before we got on here, one of the things Cav and I were talking about is we want to be able to somehow quantify what $1 trillion actually is in like a visual. So when you think about it, it's not just like a word you use. You can actually visualize it. So,
Or try to
or
visualize it,
try to
right? Like
visualize it. So I'll go up and I'll read the first question and you want to read the answers. That work, Stack?
let's do it.
Okay. The first trivia question was, how many miles would 1 trillion $1 bills stacked end to end measure in miles?
All right, I'm going to try to say this without screwing this number up, but it comes in at 96,906,656 miles, which that actually
Miles.
if you put that into, okay, well, what the heck could that even be? What does that distance look like? That exceeds the distance from our Earth to the sun. And that's just 1 trillion, right? That's not even 1.75 trillion. So that's almost like to the sun, back, and then part way back to the sun.
Yeah, and that's if both of these bills pass. Well, one of them did. So it's the, what was it, infrastructure 1.3, and if this one's 1.7 or like that 2.3,
Yeah,
then it's like almost like three, over 3 trillion. So it's
right.
to the sun and back, and a little bit back towards the sun, which is wild.
That is a lot of money.
So, anyways, the second trivia question is, the Beatles were a worldwide phenomenon from 1960 to 1970s, with the most number one hits of all time coming in at 20 songs. Which song was released on this date in 1963 that knocked their other hit, She Loves You, off the number one slot in the UK chart?
It is I Want to Hold Your Hand.
I wanna hold your hand. I think that's how it goes.
The Neighborhood Money podcast album will be releasing sometime in 2022.
Yeah, we said we're a finance podcast, not a musical one. So give me give me some slack.
I would say that's probably one of my top 5 Beatles songs.
The Beatles are a pretty darn good band. As we said earlier, my genres are just all over the place, but if we're just hanging out around the house, I'll play quite a bit of Beatles.
All right, Drew. So what's been going on over in the, the new dad neighborhood?
I think we can almost put to bed this kitchen remodel saga. So, as you've been following along with this segment, has been, well, we started this whole thing back in, I think, May. So the our last hiccup was the sink countertop was wrong when they brought it in last week. So we asked as much as we can to see if we could get that piece in before Thanksgiving, and the company we were working with was great to work with, and they actually got that countertop section into our house finally. So the house is put together. Only thing we don't have is backsplash, but we are kind of just going to wait on that until maybe it's spring because we don't necessarily need it, and we've just been living in a construction zone for so long that we just want it to be done with. So we got that put in. I put in the sink, tried hooking it all up, checked again this morning. Little bit of dribbles from one section. So I think I'll put that back together today, and I think I'd have the plan on how to get it no water. So we'll do that, and then we can actually, I think, live in not a construction zone, and I'll be extremely happy about that.
So looking back, what would you say like the biggest pain point was, if you can point it to one specific thing through this whole process?
One thing, jokingly, would be I cannot stand cardboard anymore. For how many cardboard runs I had to make, everything comes in cardboard. Everything you order comes in cardboard. And I filled up, I think, my truck bed 8, 10, even maybe more than that, just with cardboard. So I'm sick, and that's breaking it down. So I'm sick and tired of cardboard. So that was one paid area. But as far as something else on it, I would say making sure you have a good scheduled plan and really think through each project. So instead of saying, I need the plumber to come in and hook up piping, making sure you say, okay, cabinet should be here this day. We need you here now, or like when they get put in, just so we can keep moving forward. And it's not just plumbing, it's, let them know you might need to hook water up to the fridge. You might need to account for a countertop coming in later and having a different sink with a garbage disposal. You might have to think about, if you are having a garbage disposal or not, tell your electrician that, so they have to be able to talk with your plumber. So there's so many like little things. It's not just saying I need the plumber to come in and hook up water here. just make sure you can say like every little piece of it. So what do I want done? I want the sink here. I'm going to have a garbage disposal. It's going to hook up to the fridge. I'm going to have a dishwasher. Where's all this going to be put out? And then really have that planned out, because part of those bids that you get, if you don't talk that through, you can come in with a higher bill towards the end. So that's like another finance budgeting side of it, is if you really don't think your project through, you come up with, these miscellaneous expenses or higher prices than you would have initially paid for.
Is that just because, like the electrician or the plumber might have to come out multiple times, or
Yeah,
is
it's
that kind of
either
where that cost flows through?
if they have to come out through multiple times, or if you don't tell them the full scope of work, they're going to give you a bid for what you told them, and they're not really going. They potentially aren't going to go telling you what else you may need. So that's something
Gotcha.
just to think about, is, when you're doing the projects, if you don't think through it, their scope of work of what their quote was potentially could be higher. But that was that, probably the scheduling stuff, cardboard and supply chain really sucked during this period, but that's not going to potentially last forever.
And that cardboard.
And that cardboard. I didn't really get any cardboard cuts, but even like today, or when we put stuff back into the house that we had from like the wedding, but we didn't want to put away until the kitchen was done. It's like putting all that stuff away. All that stuff comes in cardboard. So I had all of that stuff we had to put away too. It's like all in cardboard. I know I'm very fortunate that I was able to do it and we had all
Yeah.
that stuff, but first world problems, cardboard just is pain in my. Anything in your neighborhood happening?
I thought this would be an interesting topic to bring up, as we typically spend this segment just not even talking about financing or finances and really just sharing what's going on in each of our worlds. But this last week, I frequently look at my credit score, and I actually had a drop in my credit score, a notification on a drop in my credit score, where my credit score dropped 10 points. I'm like, what the heck could cause this? Like I've said in some of the other episodes, like I'm fairly diligent with paying off my credit card weekly. I never run a balance month over month. And so I was like, what the heck is going on here? So I actually went into my credit report, and I had my credit utilization rate, which we've talked about in a prior episode. It actually increased from 0% to 5% because we had a heightened month of spending with the holidays upon us and things like that, and some other, larger bills that needed to be paid that I paid with my credit card. And because I didn't pay it off on the date that they pulled my credit score from, it actually increased the amount that I'm utilizing my credit, even though I'm
It's
paying it
still
off in
low.
full each and every month. Yeah, and it's still low. So I just thought that was like a super interesting, because it hasn't happened to me before. And I thought, hey, why not share that with our neighbors as like a reminder? Like, even if you pay off your credit card in full,
Yep.
even if you are wise and smart with your money management, just not paying off, your credit by the time, or your credit card by the time they pull your credit, all the information they need to calculate your credit score, it could still negatively impact your credit.
That's wild. And then where did you get your alert from? And this is probably just when you're getting that, just like a soft pull, so it's not really affecting your credit score. So
Yep.
then where would you have got that alert from?
Yeah, so I actually, based on the conversations we've had, Drew, and with this podcast, I
Mhm.
set up a Mint account again, I should
You
say,
did.
and I use that now for my credit score and for tracking my net worth. So that actually directly was like, hey, there has been movement in your credit score. Come check it out. So I went in there. I'm like,
And able to investigate a little bit.
yeah, like I said, I'm like, what the could impact my credit score? Like, I haven't done anything. I've just been living the same way I've been living, since I've had credit on my personal balance sheet, I guess you could say. So yeah, then I went in there, and it was easy. It tells you like the different tiers of your credit score. So whether that's the amount of debt you have out, your credit utilization, length
Mhm.
of debt, or length of credit, it breaks that all down. It actually tells you too, like for each category, the amount of impact it has on it. So credit utilization has a high impact on your credit score. So that's
Yep.
why even me having an increase of from 0% to 5% credit
And
utilization,
5% is like nothing.
yeah, I mean, they recommend, I think, like under 10%, but that still had a negative 10 points to my credit score.
Dang.
Dang, but then at the same time, it's like, I'm not using that for anything right now, and even with that 10 point
Yeah, you should
hurt,
be able to get that back pretty fast.
yeah,
And it's
so
not
at
gonna
the end of the
hurt
day,
you.
it's not a big deal, but could have been a big deal if all of a sudden I had used up 50% of my credit, if I had like a huge
when
life
that got
event, right?
pulled.
And that could have dropped my credit score by probably 100 or so or more points, you
Yeah.
know? So it's just things to think about when you're trying to manage all of this stuff in the financial world.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up this week's episode. What is this, 18 for us? So, once again, if you've been listening this far, we want to thank you. Let us know what we missed for this whole Build Back Better plan. If there's anything else you wanted to hear from that. And we hope that you guys like this trivia and the neighborhood money little segment of what's happening in your neighborhood. And with all that said, we want to thank you again, and we'll see you next week in the neighborhood.